Now, centuries ago, three guys named Cyrus, Darius, and Xerxes founded the Persian Empire. It was a thriving realm until Alexander the Great came and burnt down the capital Persepolis in 334 BC. Several hundred years later, the Arabs came and defeated the Persian Empire, and that is how Islam first took root in Persia. Now, fast forward several centuries to the early 19th century, and Nasir al-Din Shah reigned as the ruler of Persia. Now, this Shah was a man with an insatiable libido. It was so ravenous, so thirsty, that he had a harem of about 1,600 wives with numerous concubines, resulting with him having a lot of kids. He showered them all with luxuries and ended up squandering all of Persia's money. So in 1891, Nasir al-Din Shah sold off tobacco to Brits for about 15,000 British pounds. As a result, the cost of shisha and tobacco rose. A fatwa, a religious order, was issued to make sure no one smoked British tobacco. If anyone even dared, they'd be kicked out of the mosque. Now, given that smoking was so common, Iranians were so shrimp that they staged the 1906 tobacco revolt. And so Nasir al-Din Shah was assassinated. His just as reliable son, Muzaffar, took over and promptly left on a Euro trip, came back with no money, and the country was yet again in another financial crisis. His solution was to sell exclusive rights for oil to a guy named William Knox Darcy. A little while later in 1908, after Darcy left, lo and behold, oil is found. The British go on to pay £2 million for 51% of oil rights and created the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. Fast forward a couple of years and World War I is out and about, the demand for oil increases, putting pressure on the APOC. At this point, Iranians are getting a little irritated at the uneven distribution of profits, and to make matters worse, in 1919, Ahmed Shah signed the APOC agreement. Britain now had control of the Persian treasury, communication, military, and transportation of the nation. The APOC owned Persia. In 1925, the Majlis, or the Persian parliament, made Reza Khan Pahlavi, who was supported by the British, the absolute ruler of Iran. It was under Reza Shah that the 1933 supplemental agreement was arranged. Britain's oil rights in Persia were extended until 1961 in exchange for yearly minimum payments of 975,000 British pounds. But most importantly, Persia became officially known as Iran. Yet every ruler is not complete without an arch-nemesis who, in Reza Shah's case, was a young lawyer named Mohammad Mossadegh. A strong nationalist, his sole goal was justice for his people and to get rid of the APOC agreement. After Majlis passed the resolution to nationalize oil, it sends Mossadegh to the pinnacle of his power. Later on, due to an overwhelming demand from the public, he agreed to become prime minister as he felt true democracy was finally in play. Now, Mossadegh also had his fair share of rivals, his rivals primarily being the British, who did not want the nationalization of oil. Mossadegh, in turn, was able to gain the sympathy from North America and was able to force all of the British out of Iran. Abadan, the island of oil, crumbled, seeing as Iranians never quite learned how to work the machines, and the British sabotaged the oil companies. While President Harry Truman was sympathetic to Iran's woes, Iran's point of view of the West changed drastically when President Dwight D. Eisenhower came into power in 1953. The Dulles brothers manipulated Eisenhower into thinking that Iran nationalizing oil was an act of communism, and thus Operation Ajax was born. So in 1953, the West engineered a coup d'etat to overthrow Mossadegh and put the old Shah back on the throne. Basically, the Americans had stabbed Iran in the back, given the fact that Mossadegh had trusted the Americans so much. America will now be referred to as the Great Satan in the eyes of the Iranians. Given the fact a coup was just staged, the group Savak was formed to act as the Shah's police, purging the Tudeh party and the members of the National Front. Mohammad Reza Shah, now propped up by the U.S., became very pro-Western, spawning the White Revolution. During this time, women are given the right to vote, and the organization, the Literacy Corps, were founded to educate children. Reza Shah also tried to play Robin Hood, taking a lot of money and land from the wealthy and giving it to the poor, but the most radical thing was that all the Americans were exempt from Iranian laws. Obviously, a lot of people were angry about this. Probably the most strength of all the masses was Ayatollah Khomeini. The fact that the Shah was secularizing Iran scared him, as it weakened the power of Islam in the country, so he spoke out. As a result, he was kicked out of the country to Iraq, where he stayed exiled until the 1979 revolution. So with the 1979 revolution in motion, it was at this point that the exiled Ayatollah told the Iranians that he needed to stand up, and that was how the fated Black Friday occurred. Theology students in a university protested, and 100 were killed by the Shah's Savak. This sparked the ensuing cycle of 40 days of protest and 30 days of mourning. With Iran getting more and more unstable, the U.S. wanted to make sure that nothing jeopardized their oil relationship. So they told the Iranian ambassador that they should give concessions to the people, but at the same time rule with an iron fist. Receiving extremely mixed signals, the Shah got confused and left the country in shambles. With the Shah off on his extended vacation, Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Iran against the will of Jimmy Carter. In Iran, he was welcomed back by a military unrest in which the Shah's men tried to assassinate him. In return, the Shah's men were killed and replaced by a new body, the Revolutionary Guard, which today is the second most important body in Iran.
Ayatollah Khomeini created the Guardianship of the Jurist, a new constitution that granted him supreme authority over the state as guardian jurist, along with an advisory committee of 12. A referendum voted the guardianship of the jurist into being, and Iran officially became an Islamic republic. The problems with Khomeini had just begun. The Revolutionary Guard was executing lots of the Shah's men, and the people were calling for the Shah to stand trial. With the country continuously spiraling into chaos, the Shah flew to New York to be treated for his cancer. This, along with the Prime Minister Bazargan meeting with high-level U.S. officials, only fueled Iranians' fears that the U.S. would try to get the Shah back in power. And so the stage was set for the Iranian hostage crisis. On November 4, 1979, Iranian students took 52 American hostages in the U.S. Embassy. The U.S. obviously was in an uproar. They immediately threatened military action if there were any fatalities and implemented economic sanctions. They also tried their hand at a rescue mission, which failed quite miserably, and Ayatollah Khomeini saw it as an act of God. Iran wanted just three things: a confession that the USA had interfered with the Iranian government, a promise that they would no longer interfere, and the return of the Shah's money, which was in banks across the world, to Iranian banks. The U.S. was happy with all of these except the one about the money. In the midst of negotiations, Washington stood by as it received knowledge of Iraq's plans to attack Iran. Iran was weak, in need of money and military weapons, and the USA let this information work its way up the grapevine straight to Saddam Hussein. With Iraq attacking, Iran had no choice but to reopen negotiations as they needed the USA's money and military weapons to fight Iraq. Up until the very last seconds of his administration, Jimmy Carter was making calls trying to get all the money to Iran in exchange for the hostages. As a final slap in the face, they released the hostages minutes after Reagan was sworn in. And that is the genesis of the Iran-Iraq War and current relations between Iran, Iraq, and the USA. Throughout the war, thousands of Iraqis died, Saddam Hussein gained power, Iran continued to lose economic stability, and most importantly, they gained a deep-seated hatred for Iraq. With Reagan as president, the Iran-Contra affair then came into existence. Behind the scenes, America was both aiding Iraq and Iran in order for the two to destroy each other, since America thought if those two powers were rapidly becoming weaker, their ally, Saudi Arabia, would gain power. Secretly, Reagan gave weapons illegally to Iran in order to leverage them. Hezbollah, however, a Shia paramilitant group, captured American hostages, so Reagan gave them weapons in hopes they'd release the hostages. Sending the weapons to Nicaragua, the Contras received money from Iran because of those weapons. Needless to say, the American press were shramped when they found out about Reagan's deceiving ways, and he was almost impeached. A few years later, another war was brewing, the Afghanistan War. Afghanistan was in civil war, the Taliban versus Northern Alliance. With Massoud heading up the Northern Alliance, the Taliban contracted one of the most well-known figures in American history to kill him, Osama bin Laden. The Taliban promised that if Osama helped assassinate Massoud, al-Qaeda would be able to stay in Iran, and so his life came to an end with a suicide bomb on September 10, 2001. Armed with a military strategy and a bomb campaign supplied by Iranian intelligence, America defeated the Taliban and established a new puppet government for Afghanistan. Bush repaid this gesture with his famous Axis of Evil speech and rejected the olive branches from Iran to help defeat Iraq. But at this point in time, it was not just America that had strained relations with Iran. Britain sent their foreign minister to speak with the President Khatami about a very different issue: nuclear technology. Khatami said that he didn't want to build bombs, and luckily for the West, the Ayatollah deemed that nukes were a sin. However, the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, found a secret nuclear facility, and so the nuclear conflict began. The E3 program, made up of European powers UK, France, and Germany, tried to get Iran to stop enriching uranium and sign the NPT, or Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran did not agree to this, and in retaliation it spurred many shadow wars with one goal: foiling Iran's nuclear program. Israel and the USA did many things to try and mangle the program. They manufactured a computer virus called Stuxnet that messed with the centrifuges. The Mossad, or Israeli secret intelligence, began killing off nuclear scientists. In response, Iran began killing Israeli citizens, and the USA became a target for bomb threats. Till today, the issue has not been resolved. There have been several attempts to negotiate proper nuclear treaties, but a consensus has not come into fruition. With Ahmadinejad as the radical previous president, it was hard to suss out a deal. Nevertheless, there does seem to be hope for a treaty to be reached between the new moderate President Rouhani and the West. With John Kerry and Rouhani in negotiations, there seems to be a couple points of contention that could significantly influence the outcome of Iran-US relations. Economic sanctions have been extremely crippling, so in return for the US to alleviate some of them, Iran should extend its nuclear breakout timeline, meaning they'll slow down their centrifuges and cut back the amount of uranium they're enriching. Overall, this new direction of diplomacy would ensure Iranian compliance and will rebuild stronger economic ties with the US.